What's going on, bras bros? Welcome to another Bra Mithra video. Today we're going to be talking about the Indomitable Grimmory Survivor and his infamous Gusk knives.
Infamous?
Infamous.
Oh, all right. Yeah, so welcome back. Hello, Aluminum.
Hello.
Thanks for doing the intro.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while, yeah. It's a special occasion.
I didn't know if I had it in me still.
Yeah. No, you definitely do. It's a special occasion. We're talking about Gusk knives. I know Grimmory is one of your favorites. I know we also talked about Grimmory and what we thought we would get from him before. Grimmory has been a very, very neat one. I've always really liked Grimmory.
Yeah, Grimmory is a great model. He's like a great character design. Had some really interesting lore that was put out, some stuff that we're kind of still speculating on, but yeah, he's changed a lot between both his original beta resin release and the new plastic release that just came out. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the changes that happened.
He is the second, if you're using the sim, the second Gorm Indomitable Survivor. If you're not using the sim, he is technically the first that we've seen to get a physical release, which Morg was sim only. So this is technically the second.
The install guide for Grimmory does have some rules for if you do not have the Gambler's Chest rules. So we kind of were talking about this a little bit earlier, and we were discussing how interesting it was. So the text reads, the next time a level 3 Gorm is defeated, gain the Indomitable Resource Impacted Gusk with a limit of twice per campaign. So we thought this wording was interesting in how it limits you to only gaining the Gusk twice. If you're not using the Gambler's Chest rules, keep that in mind. And we kind of determined that the reasoning behind this is because the pattern rules aren't really explained. So they don't have to explain to players that don't have GCE that there's this crafting requirement on the pattern card itself of 2 for the Gusk knife, right? So they can physically limit the amount of times you gain just the resource to limit how many times you can craft the knife.
Yeah, that is correct. It's a really interesting way of doing it, like you said, because, yeah. But you'd still gain the pattern anyway, even though because the resource gives you the pattern. But I guess you could just ignore that if you didn't want to using the install guide rules.
Yeah, and we were discussing, I don't know, maybe this is something that they...
Because you
definitely not that part. But like we were discussing, you know, and maybe this is something the community wants to weigh in on is, say for hypothetically, say you're playing on the sim and you have both Morg and Grimmory, and Morg's install guide says something similar. The next time a level 3 Gorm is defeated, gain the blubber,
or the butter or whatever. Was it butter around?
No, it's
whatever it is. You gain more.
It's called breathtaking blubber.
That's it. Yeah.
Gain breathtaking blubber, and limit once per campaign. So Bra thinks, you know, if you defeat a level 3 Gorm, you would gain both breathtaking blubber and impacted Gusk at the same time. I think you should only be gaining one at a time, but I'm kind of influenced by the real Indomitable resource rules in Gambler's Chest.
Correct.
But what does the community think?
Correct. This is for
Aluminum right
players.
Or is Bra right?
Yeah, it's only for sim players who have to worry about this because there is no Morg physical. But yes, you should be getting both, but you should probably do it at random. I agree 100%. You should do it at random. That's the rules as intended. That's the spirit of the game. You should draw randomly.
Spirit of the game, yeah. That's too rewarding to get 2 resources at once.
Yeah, but you should get both. Rules as written.
Rules as written. You should get both. Yeah.
Speaking of rules as written. All right, this is very interesting. So normally I do all these things with Jay, but this Gusk is a beta, but it's mostly the same. There's going to be some changes, but this one is it's interesting. This one's really fun with the rules and everything. And I know you are my tasting note bro.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, we do the I do the tasting notes for the Discord and everything. And this one is very interesting. That's the reason why I'm glad that you had the time to do this. Because the rules for the actual Gusk knife itself have changed from the beta.
Significantly, yeah.
Yeah, so you want to read the beta one?
Sure. So one of the things about the beta cards in general was that the rules for them were kind of split over both cards, which is inconvenient in the sense that you were crafting them individually, most likely. I guess I'll kind of just go over them from top to bottom. So they are weapon, melee, dagger, shield, bone. That's all their keywords. They have a speed of 3, an accuracy of 6+, and a strength of 5. They have the paired and block 1 special rules, but they also have additional special rules. If paired, this gains Grim Step and Blindside. This is where the clunkiness of having these rules on separate cards comes in. So one of the Gusk knives defines Blindside. When you would wound the monster from its blind spot, all of its reflex reactions become failure reactions until this attack ends. And then Grim Step says, when you're attacking and block a hit, you may move 6 consecutive spaces. If you do, your next wound attempt, this attack gains strength equal to the number of spaces moved. And both, the Gusk knives are identical, so they both have a down green affinity. Consecutive spaces was later defined, not later, it was defined with a living glossary card in the same set. When a survivor is instructed to move consecutive spaces, they must move without occupying the same space more than once. A survivor could not, for example, move back and forth between 2 spaces to fulfill consecutive space movement. They could, however, move around a monster or move in a straight line.
The consecutive spaces thing, I guess now they're just saying unrepeated, so which is basically the same, but it is nice to have the actual rules for consecutive still available. I agree.
Mm-hmm. But it makes me wonder, should they have just kept consecutive spaces as the term, right? Like, I guess we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. Did you want to talk about Grimstep at all?
Grimstep's neat, but again, for the most part, Grimstep was dropped. We'll just talk about what made its way to Grimmory.
Grimstep, it was kind of dropped, but was kind of just condensed down. Like what they are doing with Grimstep, they condensed down into the regular special ability of the Gusk knives, right? Like it's not a special rule anymore. It's just like what the Gusk knives do, and different. It's different, but it's you can see that it's very similar in idea of how they wanted to address it. Yep,
I agree. It's the heart of the ability is still there.
Yeah.
So now we have the one thing that is interesting to know between the beta and the actual new white box release with Gusk knives is it's no longer a shield, which is fun. I've joked about the whole thing for Shield of Ring. I love the fact that it used to be a shield. It's fine, but for because having the ability to use Shield of Ring does make this really crazy. But it is interesting because it used to synergize a lot with the actual Gorm armor and guard. So not being a shield is an interesting choice. But
you heard how he said it's fine, right? Like it's fine. It's fine.
Well,
that means it's not fine.
No, it's fine. I understand. It's because of Shield of Ring and stuff, and moving the spaces and stuff. It would have gotten out of hand adding range with the shield for Shield of Ring and stuff. So it's understandable. It's just a shame because Gorm armor itself could use the buff. So it's like what do they call it? A casualty. It's just like an unintended casualty or unintended consequence of removing it. That Gorm armor kind of takes a buff. It would have been nice to have the buff. So that's all. Yeah.
I was joking that Bra was talking too much about how good this was with Shield of Ring. So they're punishing him specifically by removing the ability to do that. So
it is fun. I did get to do it. I lived the dream in the sim.
Yeah.
So
illegal.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this is the way it has now been reworded. So the way that it now reads, again, is really cool. We're going to talk a lot about this. How should we approach this sentence? There is a lot to talk about in this one simple sentence for the new.
I think, the easiest thing is to kind of just go from top to bottom. We can compare it with the old Gusk knives. So, like Bra mentioned, like the keywords have changed. The new Gusk knives are weapon, melee, dagger, bone. They've dropped the shield keyword that was on the beta Gusk knives. The stats have changed. It's still 3 speed. The accuracy has gone down to 7+, and the strength has gone up to 7, and that was from 6+ and 5 respectively. They're still paired. They've lost block 1 as a special rule, and they've lost Grimstep as a special rule, but kind of not completely, as we kind of mentioned. So the new rule, just straight out reading it, it says, after each wound attempt with this, move 3 unrepeated spaces and gain +3 strength for this attack. So that kind of spiritually is the same as Grimstep. So remember, Grimstep says, when you're attacking and block a hit, you may move 6 consecutive spaces. If you do, your next wound attempt this attack gains strength equal to the number of spaces you moved. So you're still gaining +1 strength for each space that you move. But it does change it. Like with this rule, you're forced to move those 3 spaces.
Yes.
it's not a selection, right? Like Grimstep, you may move 6 consecutive spaces. This, you have to move those 3 spaces.
Yes, and it's also not a successful wound attempt.
Yes.
You're forced to do it regardless if you fail or succeed.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so my initial kind of expectation for this rule was that it was basically tied like thematically to hunting big game, because that's like a concept that's in the Gorm expansion, right? Is like big game hunting, like monsters that are 3x3s or larger. So my initial kind of expectation for this card was that it would be somewhat nerfed against monsters that are 2x2s, so like White Lion, or smaller even. So encounter monsters like Bone Eaters are just 1x1. You would have to break your status of being in range or out of range for that attack. So my idea was, with the 3x3 monster, each wound attempt, you can move back and forth 3 spaces and get your +3 strength for the rest of the attack. And that's kind of the idea, is that you'd be moving back and forth like along one of the sides of the monster. But if you wanted to use this to change positioning for a face of the monster, you would have to break that in range kind of condition of your survivor, which would cancel the rest of your remaining hits. So that's kind of how I saw it, as being a little bit balanced out. But we found out afterwards that that's not actually how it's intended to be played.
We have to break down this rule. So there's a lot here, which is, again, why I'm glad that you joined me on this, because I know you and we always talk a lot about the rules and then get clarifications. And there's a lot here to explain how this works. Let's talk about the concept of sliding along the flank of a monster. First, we'll start there. So again, you're correct. This is actually benefiting greatly from paired, which is nice. Because when you pair this, you get the 6 speed, which again, because this is after each wound attempt, the more wound attempts you're making, the more you need to move and the more strength you'll be gaining. So increasing your speed is nice here. As you said, with originally thinking that with the flank being the whole side of a 3x3, you could slide up and down it without breaking. And when you talk about breaking range, you're talking about the hard corner for adjacency, because the hard corner going from one side to the other side would, because it's no longer an adjacent space. So without reach, you're out of range. So when you took those hard corners, you'd be 100% correct. And you need to do an unrepeated space. So you can't just go up and down and move within the same space, because those would be repeated. Now, how this works is after each wound attempt, this does trigger. So you make a wound attempt, whether or not you fail or succeed, you then need to move, and then you increase your strength for the attack. So the strength gains and the movement are per wound attempt, and then it lasts for the entire attack for the strength
so I
gains.
think you would be gaining plus 15 strength if you got all 6 hits, correct?
Correct. If you
So your last attack or your last wound attempt, sorry, would have plus 15 strength.
yes,
The previous
if you
one
hit
would
with
have
all
plus
6.
12. The previous one would have plus 9.
Yes.
You know,
Because
blah, da, 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 da,
and you're
down
making
the
the
line.
wound attempt before you gain the strength, so that's why you're saying 15 and not 18, because even if you hit with all
Right.
6, correct.
I had to think about that
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
That math was a little complicated
Nope,
for me.
yep, nope, you're correct. That's why it's 15, because you're only going to gain the bonus for 5 if you hit with all 6. Because your last wound attempt doesn't benefit. Or your first wound attempt doesn't benefit, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, now the point here is then how does attack, or when does attack range actually come into this? Because normally, if a monster moves during a reaction, the second it moves out of your range or whatever, the attack ends unless there's something that continues it, right? Normally, Kingsman would do this. Kingsman would move, but the hit location itself, when it makes that movement, the hit location itself will say if you have King Step, you may chase, or you may move 3 along with the Kingsman, or like Pursue being on the Smog Singer things. They're things
Right.
that are...
And that's kind of why I was like thinking about this, is because of how Pursue works, right? So Pursue specifically states like you move, you follow it, and you draw an additional hit location card. Because kind of it implies otherwise that you would be breaking that range check and losing any out of range hits, which you would as per the rules due
Correct.
to monster movement, right?
Yes. But we have now learned that range for monster movement and range for survivor within range, survivor movement and monster movement are not the same. We've learned that now.
Mm-hmm.
The check, and this is never stated, so learning this now, so we have to open up this whole big thing. So on page 74 of a 1.6 rulebook, of the core rulebook, you'll have the whole survivor's attack process. And it's a step-by-step process that goes through the wound steps and the attack steps. So you have an attack step, which is when before you've drawn hit locations, is when you're doing the attack part of it. And the attack encompasses wounding. So that's why the +3 strength continues for the entire attack. Wound attempts are part of an attack. And checking for range applies during the wound step, not during the actual attack phase itself. So when you check to make sure that you're still within range for an attack is actually done during the first step of the wound thing. So you can break adjacency and you can leave range during the wounds step, which is interesting, and would allow, as Aluminum said, you could break adjacency with these movements and not end your attack. So you could circle a monster if you wanted to. You could move from the flank to the blind spot and not end your attack.
Yeah, there might be some further like gameplay implications for like other situations.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about
for
one
other
of those in a second.
abilities. Yeah, so it really does change kind of I think a somewhat important part of how the game is played, because yeah, there's probably some really funky stuff that we haven't thought about yet that you can pull off.
Yes, but so now at least we know in the future when the check for survivor range during an attack is made. It's made during step 1 of the wound process. So when it's nice to know that when the check happens. So there's lots of cool now if ever a thing were to ever happen, we would know, which is nice. It helps evaluating gear. It helps how gear works. The interesting thing here is the actual wound step itself. So we this is the one practical thing that you just alluded to that we might not have caught. had we not known how this worked. Because, again, I assumed it was the same thing as you. I assumed an attack was a survivor state, that once adjacency was broken at all, at any moment during that attack, it would end.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a static state. You don't. It has a certain checkpoint.
I guess like kind of just walk through the actual like what would an attack from Gusk knives look like if we were following these kind of amended rules, I guess, or these clarified rules.
Correct, which is interesting. We'll talk about this too, and I'll quickly go through them, and then we'll talk about Blindside. So what's the rules for Blindside? You have them up still?
Yeah, so Blindside states these are the rules as specified in the Gambler's Chest. They had one little clarification added to them from the beta gear cards. So it says a gear special rule: when you wound a monster from its blind spot, all of its reflex reactions become failure reactions until the attack ends. And then they say this includes the current reaction. That's the little clause that wasn't included on the beta gear.
Yes, which was always, even with that clause added, it doesn't really change anything. It just highlights these steps, actually. So I will go through the wound step process now. So let's say you attack with Gusk knives. You make your attack rolls. You do all your speed. You do all that stuff. You determine your hits. You draw your hit locations, which is step 1, 2, and 3 of your step 1, 2, and 3 of the attack process. 4 is when you read the hit locations. This is when you check for traps, is step 4. So it's even before you start making wound attempts is when you check for traps. This is also when spear and stuff would trigger blue charm. But then 5 is now when you go to resolve hit locations. And when you enter step 5 here of the survivor attack is when you go to the wound step process. So the wound step process is when the first part of that. This is when you check for range. This part right here in step 1 of the wound step. So as long as you're within range right now, your attack will proceed. Now, going through the wound step, this is when you select step 1. You would have to first then now select first strike and stuff like that. 2 would be when you perform special rules. So special rules these are the rules on cards that are written outside of reaction stuff. So these would be things like battle pressure and stuff where it's a special rule written on the hit location card itself that's not below a wound reaction or a reflex or something.
Yeah. Or like things with Screaming Antelope where it's like gain +1.
Correct. -2
strength.
toughness.
I can't remember
or
the exact
+1,
rules,
yeah. If attacking with a shield. Yeah. Attacking with a shield, stuff like that. Attacking with a shield, gain +2 luck. When attacking with the club, the monster suffers toughness or whatever. Things like that. So now for step 3 is when you make your wound attempt. So you roll your dice, you add your strength, you do all this stuff, and at this point, now the Gusk knives would now trigger. The movement and the strength increase. So regardless of your result of the wound attempt, this is when you would now move after making the wound attempt. So let's say you were at the flank of the Gorm. You would then move, let's say you were at the back, like everyone does. You're at the very back because Gorm's going to retch. It's going to back up those 2 spaces. So you don't want to be in position for it to back up and retch. You want to move to its blind spot now, or move to the flank if it is going to retch, right? Let's say you were in the blind spot and you want to get out of the way from retch. So you were in the blind spot. You're moving to the flank so it will back up and not trample you, and then you'll be able to continue your attack. So you would move now at the end of step 3. Step 4, you would now check if you succeeded or rolled a critical, is after moving that you would now check for critical wounds. If you did critical wound, you would then resolve the critical wound, canceling reactions and all that things. If not, you'd continue to step 5 where you actually wound the monster. It's at this point where if you were attacking with Gusk knives and you were in the flank of the monster, before you were at its blind spot, now you're in its flank. This is when you would actually deal the wound. So if you moved out, if you started your attack from the blind spot and you're now trying to avoid retch and you move to its flank, the wound would be dealt right now where you're in flank. This would not trigger Blindside.
That's right. But vice versa, if you move to its blind spot, right, you would trigger Blindside.
The wound happens after the movement. So you could trigger Blindside from where the wound is. Then now that you've dealt the wound, this is when the stuff that's on Blindside, right? Now that you've dealt the wound, now if you're in the blind spot, Blindside would now trigger because now you've dealt the wound. Now it changes all those reaction failures or reflexes to failure, right? Is that what Blindside says?
That's right, yeah. All of its reflex reactions become failure reactions until the attack ends.
And then you get a survival opportunity, which is step 6, where other survivors could surge. And then 7 is when you actually perform reactions. So this is when Blind Spot would have changed it. So the parentheses doesn't actually change anything about Blind Spot. It's just a reminder rule, which is great that they added that. Because, as you can tell, look how long it's taken me to explain this.
Yeah. And, like going through it step by step like that, it really emphasizes like how, like once you trigger that Blindside special rule that one time, because it holds until the end of the attack, right? All of the remaining wound attempts that you make, because you have that +3 strength for each attack, plus all of the reflex reactions become failure reactions. These knives are very strong.
Yes. Yep. Because now you'd have +3. Then when you go to step 8, resolve your hit location, now you would go back to step 1. And this is when it would check now for step 1 to check for range. So had you moved out of range, let's say you failed and you didn't want to continue your attack, right? Let's say you were on your 5th speed and now you want to get away from the monster. So you're attacking with Gusk knives, you make your wound attempt for your final wound attempt, and now you've just ran away. You've ran out of its range. You've ran 3 spaces away. You didn't cancel your attack yet, so check step 4 for critical wounds, 5 for wounding, 6 for the survivor attempts or survival opportunities and all those stuff, and 7. All these reactions would still fire, even though you've broken attack range. It's not so. It's neat to know that you can't end an attack until step 1. It's just a neat thing that I wish would have been in part of the rules here to notice. To say like above step 1 or even like wound steps, and then underneath this on this page it would say check for range.
yeah it's just one small sentence that needs to be added to this section. But it does change quite a bit in like what you can do, like even the idea that like that survival opportunity still exists there even after you're out of range. Like before your attack, like I would have thought your attack was just over, right? And then there'd be no opportunities for that. But you can technically disengage while the other survivors take that opportunity to surge or dash or do whatever they need to do. So yeah, it's in a way it seems more flexible and gives a little bit more player agency, but it's also not really apparent that is how it was supposed to work, I guess, right? Like it's
for sure.
It changes everything.
Yeah, it changes everything. Like this, the freedom that the system has here is much more than I thought would happen. Because I thought it would be the same thing like you said. I thought an attack was a static survivor status. And when you broke adjacency, that was it. The attack ended. You'd do the reactions. You'd finish off because nothing could stop the reactions. And that'd be it. Your attack would now end. I had no idea there was such freedom of movement. So this one sentence on this one card is such an interesting, eye-opening thing that has now been given like clarity when we got clarifications and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure, like off the top of my head, I can't think of any gear, but I can think of some cool ways that you could use this with gear that has like modal range versus being like adjacent for attacking. Like say what comes to mind off the top of my head is Sun Ring Bow, in how it has range but can also be used to attack adjacently, right? Like I'm not sure exactly, we'd have to look more at it, but if there's an ability where you can like move at any point and still be considered attacking, right? It gives you a lot more flexibility with that kind of gear card. Or if it doesn't exist yet, because off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but like,
well, we might see it because
we could see that now. Like that pathway has been opened up for gear that lets you do cool like mid attack movement kind of shenanigans, I suppose, right? So
yes,
I like it in that sense.
Yeah, who knows what's going to be? Because you and I both speculate that the next Indomitable survivor we see will probably be Badar.
Right, I agree.
For Spidicules. Badar had a secret fighting art that works like Gusk knives. It had that crescent step where the secret fighting art gave you a movement during your attack that would need to be spent immediately that you could use to break out of an attack. So
yeah, I just pulled it up here. Actually, the wording is specifically during your act when your attack ends, gain movement limit once per round.
Yes. So there's fighting arts like that could be tweaked to say after a wound attempt, move without gaining movement, and then if you had bows and stuff, you could continue attacking. Because it wouldn't end your attack, which is so interesting because now that we know, just knowing where the range check is actually done within the attack process is super helpful and opens up a lot of design space.
Agreed.
All right. Well, Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for doing your intro. Everyone will enjoy it.
Okay. And I guess as a community question, like, what did people think about these new Gusk knives? Did you agree with us? Did you think it was going to cancel if you broke adjacency? Or do you like the new method of being able to move during an attack? Or, do you have any ideas on a good situation that you could use this for?
Yeah, I wonder how people would have played it before this.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a discussion on Lantern's Reign and stuff about people wondering about how to play this. It's very interesting. But did you play it correctly right away? That's a good question. Maybe there was others out there who did, yeah.
We were just thinking too hard about it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining me.
Bye-bye.